You know, niggas gotta get their priorities together. Got their mind on the wrong things, spending their money in the wrong way.
Trapaholics, real trap shit.
Say you need that car with the rims and a charm, just like Jim. It's more than life. Yeah.
I'm telling you. Talk to him.
Say you need that LV bag
For what?
with the belt and the hat.
That's all you got though.
It's more than life. Yeah.
Talk to him. Real.
Say you wanna turn up at the club,
Why?
buy some bottles, impress them girls.
what?
It's more than life.
Oh, fucking everybody.
Yeah.
Damn, son, where'd you find this?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Saints and Appetizers podcast. And who dat? And we're coming at you with some main course. It's been a little while since we got to eat some main course, but we got some main course on here for you, and it's gonna include a little bit of the training camp notes, and there's some other stuff, some top NFL top 100 and things to go over, but let's go ahead and get into that right now. So can I get a menu? And the first one is probably the biggest one, probably the one that got people most excited and just energized and just rejuvenated for the new season. And what I'm talking about there is the signing of Jimmy Graham, the re-signing, the homecoming of Jimmy Graham. And I love this. I love this signing. I think he can, if nothing else, he can add a good mentor to the locker room with the young tight ends and Foster Moreau and Juwan Johnson. So I just love it for that reason. And you've seen some clips from him out of training camp where he looks slim and trim, and he didn't even play last year, so he should be healthy. He looks, you know, you can't say much until it's fully padded practice or it's preseason or it's an actual game, whether he's going to be as good. And obviously, there's no chance really that he's going to be as good as he was when he was his first stint with the Saints, because I mean he's about to be, he'll be 37 in November, so I mean it's just not logical. But I mean if he can become that touchdown red zone threat that they were missing last year, I mean that was kind of this is kind of a similar signing to the Jamal Williams signing. You know, a lot of people talk about how Jamal Williams's 17 touchdowns were all like goal line and red zone and 1 yard touchdowns. Well, that was the issue with the Saints last year. They would get down in that 15-yard area, you know, 15-yard range of the end zone, and they just couldn't get it in the end zone. And that's exactly what Jamal Williams and that's exactly what Jimmy Graham will bring to this team. And I just loved seeing some of his comments as well. You know, he took fault and blame in how things kind of turned out with the Saints, and I like that he really, you know, from what it sounds like, wishes that it never happened. He didn't want to get traded. He realizes even at this point in his career why he's still playing that his career would have been better, his numbers would have been better, and he just looks at this place as a homecoming. And by the way he speaks, you know, obviously there's coach speech and player speech that he's gonna say, oh, the Saints and Hoodats are the best fans in the league. But you know, I really believe that, you know, that this was Jimmy Graham's first home, and I think it really, if you're a real Saints fan and you follow this team, it should have been his only home. He should have never been traded at all. So let's just hope that this year coming up that he can put kind of a stamp on his career if this is his last season, because I mean any real production from him would be great. You know, I would take 25 30 catches and 300 yards for 5 touchdowns. Like I'm not looking for 2011 Jimmy Graham, 2013 Jimmy Graham, where he's going to have 1,000 plus receiving yards with double-digit touchdowns. That's not going to happen. The main reason it's not going to happen is because you already have two other young and high potential tight ends on the team with Juwan Johnson and Foster Moreau. So there's just not going to be enough balls to go around for him to put up those kind of numbers. Because when Drew Brees was here, he there were games, and especially games where they lost or just kind of looked like they weren't a team that was very physical. Drew Brees kind of just targeted, he kind of locked in on Jimmy Graham, and that would be like the only person he'd throw the ball to. And it just came like Saints offense at that time became kind of predictable, and then you a lot of people and NFL defenders around the league would say like Jimmy Graham was soft. All you have to do is hit him hard once, or you got to jam him, or he's not a good blocker. And I hate when people talk about like a flex tight end and they talk about how they're not physical or they don't block. Well, that's not what a flex tight end is for. That's not the main part of their game. The main part of their game is catching passes and catching touchdowns and getting yards. And I'm just happy that just there just seems to be like a new like energy and life around the team just because of a simple signing like this, and it's definitely you can see it in the media. The media loves that Jimmy Graham is back, but just over his career, I think this homecoming is like a little maybe too late of the homecoming, because I really would have liked him to have come back in 2018. I think the Saints were trying to bring him back for 2018, but then can't remember the exact number that Green Bay offered him. I think it was like 10 million or something. I think the Saints were only wanting to give him like 8 or something. So that it never happened then, and it never happened in 2020 when he went to Chicago. So it's kind of funny when you read Jimmy Graham's comments and stuff about how he wish he'd never left and all this, but it all comes down to business, because he obviously went to Green Bay and Chicago to get more money, which you do that as a player, you get as much as you can. But when I look back at like the time frames of when he possibly could have been a Saint again, it would have been so great if the Saints would have been able to. And I know this is just living in the past and opening old wounds, but it would have been great. It would have been great for the Saints to have been able to re-sign him, bring him back in 2018. And the reason I say that is in 2018, in that NFC Championship game against the Rams, the Saints had a backup reserve tight end in there, straight up drop a touchdown after a Demario Davis interception early in that game. And I'm talking about Dan Arnold. So I can guarantee you, if the Saints would have brought Jimmy Graham back in 2018, Dan Arnold wouldn't even been on the team. So that it's just kind of reflecting on the whole Jimmy Graham scenario, and he's made a lot of comments about it, and it's just what could have been. And I think about that a lot of times when I think about what if Sheldon Rankins wouldn't have gotten hurt in the previous game against the Eagles either, because it seemed like that they had all day to throw, all time protection, but it's happy to have him back. So let's see here. On to just injuries. It's training camp, and there's been some injuries already, so that's always something that's going to stress people out. And it was pretty wild that the first day, the scariest one out of all these injuries was definitely the Trevor Penning injury, because it's first day, and then you hear that he left early with like a foot injury, and that's what he's coming back from is a foot injury. But then you finally get some like news and clarity about it, and it turned out that it was just, I guess it was just a little inflammation and nothing to be worried about. And then he comes back and has been full in practice, and his numbers have been ramping up. So all good for now for Trevor Penning. But then this was kind of a under the radar kind of. I guess really wasn't an under the radar signing because everyone in this area knows Trey Turner because he played at LSU and he played for Carolina for a good portion of his career. And I think the Saints are just looking for some depth on the O line, especially at that guard position because Andres Pete's coming back from an injury, Cesar Ruiz is coming back from an injury, and then he ruptured his calf muscle, so he's done for the season. He didn't get so lucky as Trevor Penning as it just being something minor. And then it seems like the Saints are having some issues with injuries on the offensive line, especially the interior. It just seems to be a pretty common trend around here because then a couple days later, or I guess that was just, I'm trying to think if that was just Monday or Tuesday, either the 31st or August 1st, where Andres Pete is injured now. He has a calf strain. It's not ruptured, so he's not done for the season like Trey Turner. And then you got and then they brought in some other guards since to maybe fill those holes, but you felt good about your depth before those injuries happened. And then even today, I think Alante Taylor has some left practice with some hamstring tightness, and it's just none of those types of injuries are really avoidable in training camp, especially with this type of heat, that the heat waves over the United States that we've had lately. Some of those calf tightness or hamstring tightness. I mean, those could just be caused of like bad cramps. But hopefully, it's just first time I'm really doing a report on some training camp injuries. Hopefully, there's no more serious ones like Trey Turner. That would be nice, but it's probably at the same time it's probably wishful thinking. And let's see, on to the next thing here. We have Alvin Kamara. We talk a lot about Alvin Kamara, followed his whole court case, and talked about how probably don't really want to talk too much, don't want to hear too much more about him until the suspension actually comes down, because with violent acts and sexual acts and DUIs and things like that, it's usually a 6-game suspension, but it looks as if Alvin Kamara wants to actually go talk face to face with Roger Goodell. Whether that'll really do any good, I personally don't really think it will, but he was excused from practice today, which would be Wednesday, August 2nd. And this is what Dennis Allen had to say about it. So let me read this off. He showed initiative on Alvin's part to want to get out ahead of this and get his side of the story out in terms of visiting the commissioner. Saints coach Dennis Allen said after practice, we felt like and he felt like it was the right thing to do. I don't really want, and then he said he doesn't really want to get into all the details. We'll let the process play out, and then we'll react to whatever decisions are made. And so, I agree with Dennis Allen saying, like, yeah, it looks good and it's a good thing to do, and you gotta respect. I gotta respect Kamara for at least trying, depending on to get the suspension reduced, whether it'll help or not, because I'm not 100% sure of where it's going to start at, because I know Pac-Man Jones doesn't like the Saints, but I heard him say that he thinks it should be 8 games, because he mentioned how he had been in fights as well and during his career and had been suspended 6 games for fighting. But when I think back about Pac-Man Jones's cases and fights and stuff that he's been in, he probably was a second-time offender and probably had a gun on him as well. So I think that's kind of apples to oranges comparing Pac-Man Jones's to Alvin Kamara's situation. But then I'm thinking about, like, I'm looking over like suspensions and players that are suspended now, and the one that really stuck out to me was Ronald Jones, and I think he's with the Cowboys right now, and he's suspended just 2 games for PEDs, which there's no consistency with these suspensions because I thought always with PEDs, performance enhancing drugs, steroids, anything like that, I thought it was always like a minimum of 4 games. But I guess because he plays for the Dallas Cowboys, it's only 2 games for him. And I'm not 100% sure on this. Maybe he got suspended for the last 2 games last year with the Buccaneers, but I don't remember that. So, uh, I, so me personally thinking like going and talking to Roger Goodell is going to do any good, I really don't think it will. I think it'll just have to go kind of through the process of him handing down the suspension, and then if the Saints aren't happy with the amount of games it is, in case it is 6 or 8 games or even more, I'm sure they'll want to put in an appeal. But if it's just like in a reasonable amount of games and it's at the start of the season, like say it's just 2 games or 4 games at the very start of the season, I imagine they won't want to appeal. They'll want to just get it over with. But I think most Saints fans understand how, at least it appears that Roger Goodell feels about the Saints, and probably the Saints players and coaches, and even though Sean Payton's gone now, isn't a huge fan of the Saints. Definitely taking shots at them and kind of making them the scapegoat for Bounty Gate. I don't feel real great about that being a possibility that Alvin Kamara gets off of this. Definitely not scot-free, and probably not as light as we would like to. But kind of like Dennis Allen said, we just have to wait and see and let this play out. All right. So next thing here, this probably be the last little snippet that I have here for this podcast, and it's the NFL Top 100 came out, and I think by now all the Saints players have been announced. Where they're going to be announced, because now that they're up into like the 30s now, there haven't been. I don't think any Saints players are rated that high. I mean, some of them maybe could have been rated that high if they would have had a better season last year. Like, I'm not talking about the player personally, but the Saints personally. But some of these rankings, I was a little surprised by. I thought they were actually a little higher than I would have expected from their previous year. But we'll go. Let me go over these. There's only 4 of them, and I'm a little surprised that Tyrann Mathieu wasn't on here, because when you look at because I had a podcast a while back about Madden rankings, and he was the highest rated Saints on Madden rankings. But when it comes to NFL Top 100 and where his the other players around the league view him, they must not view him as a top 100 player or the best player on the Saints roster. But let me go over these real quick. So you have Jamal Williams. He's the first Saint that comes in on this list, even though what he did last year was as a Detroit Lion. But he comes in pretty low on this list, but this is the first time he's ever been on this list. So, that's saying something. That shows that he's getting better as a player, or who knows, with him being 27, 28, that last year may have been his best season. But he had those 17 touchdowns last year, and that they showed the highlight video of him just getting a bunch of those like five or less yard touchdowns. But I mean, that's what the running back's for. That's probably exactly what Jamal Williams was brought in for, is to get those touchdowns, because Alvin Kamara definitely wasn't getting very many touchdowns last year. Alvin Kamara had like 4 rushing touchdowns and like 1 receiving touchdown last year. So I would just take half of those touchdowns that Jamal Williams had from the running back position, and the Saints probably would have made the playoffs last year. So he comes in at 95. Like I said, towards the bottom of this list, but he still made the list. All right. So, and the second player on this list is Marshawn Lattimore. And I was a little surprised to see Marshawn Lattimore on this list. It shows that players and players around the league and the league itself respects Marshawn Lattimore. They realized how good of a player he was and how big of a game changer. Like he was like, you could say he was like one of the Saints MVPs last year because he was the most valuable player that they didn't have because their defense just looked completely different when Marshawn Lattimore was in the game. The perfect example of that is when the Saints played the Eagles. Like the Eagles just got completely shut down once Marshawn Lattimore came back, and then he had that pick six that pretty much sealed that game. But he's coming in at 89, which was the exact same ranking that he was last year. So that's kind of why I'm surprised that he's still on this list or still at the exact same spot that he was last year. I feel that because he was this 89 this year and he was last year, if he would have played all year, he probably would have been higher on this list. And that's where I get to where I'm a little surprised that these players are higher than they were last year. And so the third person on this list is Cameron Jordan. And Cameron Jordan, he is at 50 on this list, and that's pretty high, considering last year he was only 69. And I mean, it just statistic wise, he didn't have double digit sacks last year, but he did the year prior to that. So I'm a little surprised that he's actually higher on this list than he was last year. And then you get the whole they're a year older. You got these players in their 30s and older. So that's a little surprising to me that he is up so high, 50. I'm not saying, and when I say this, I'm not saying that I don't think they deserve to be there, but just with how these lists are made, I wouldn't have expected it. Honestly, once they got into like the past like the 60s, I was just thinking that Cameron Jordan and the last player on this list weren't going to be on here. So so then the fourth player on this list is Demario Davis, and he is all the way up at 43. So that's high. That's high for him as well. And last year was the first time he was ever like officially a Pro Bowler. He's been like a first team All Pro, but he's never actually been like a Pro Bowler. It's weird how the Associate Press works with all that. So the year before that, he was a 74, and so this year he's all the way up at 43, and very similar to Cameron Jordan. I don't think last year was better than the year prior, 2021. I thought Demario Davis just looked a little bit slower last year, and I think maybe this ranking comes in because he had like 6.5 sacks, but I mean that was really the only area where I thought Demario Davis was better than when he was in 2021. But do I think Demario Davis deserves to be all the way up here at 43? Of course. I'm not arguing that, but I'm just arguing the fact that I'm surprised that they're higher than what they were in 2021 because I don't think their 2022 seasons were better. Maybe it just appeared that way because the team as a whole wasn't good. But, I just think players like Cameron Jordan and Demario Davis, it's kind of obvious that they're kind of slowing down. But, they're in the end, they're it's just a rankings list. It's just a list of rankings. It's meaningless in the long run. But it's nice to see that some Saints players are getting shown their due, and hopefully they have good seasons again and they end right back up on this list. But yeah, anyways, hopefully we'll get some more news coming in here constantly with training camp. It's only about about a week and a half or so until the Saints' first preseason game. So what we're really hopeful for is no more training camp injuries, but I seriously doubt that's going to happen. So just have to wait and pray, I guess. But anyways, I think that's all I have for you this evening. So who dat? And can I get a check, please?